my 17-year mark and beginning to know about what led to Guantanamo. It's just in a couple of weeks' time, January the 31st, 2002 was when I got a call from Moisem's family to say that they had extraordinarily had a telephone call from him. He had, by complete accident and negligence on the part of those who had unlawfully kidnapped him, still got his phone. And so we knew. That's before he got to Bagram and a year before he got to Guantanamo. But that began my first experience of the cruelty and the lies and the deceit of our country in relation to a British citizen. And the first thing I was told within a day was, in fact, he has another nationality as well, potentially Pakistani, and we can't do anything about it. We cannot do anything about the British citizen. That was a lie. But they were prepared to say that, and then going to see the head of the Foreign Office, consular department, and him looking Mr. Begg in the eye, saying, "We know nothing. We are absolutely nothing. The Americans tell us nothing." And Mr. Begg, a reasonable man, saying, "But they're your allies." And only years later, when Moisem was back, and he litigated against the collusion, the complicity of the Home Office, the Foreign Office, MI5, MI6. Only later, grudgingly, when there was disclosure, they knew all along. All along. At that time, the cabinet was debating as Guantanamo was opening up, debating. And the minutes, the cabinet minutes, grudgingly revealed, Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, the longer they stay there, the better. We don't want them back, ever. That's what the minutes were saying. But they looked us all in the eye and said, "We know nothing, we can do nothing, it's the Americans." Within a very short time, another family spoke to me, the brother of Shafiq Rasul from Tipton. The brother had been studying British history. He comes from near Birmingham, studying British history and politics, and had been reading about what happened to Irish people in Britain and how they had been treated unlawfully, brutally. And he had received the first message via the Red Cross that his brother Shafiq was in Guantanamo. And so he found a lawyer in North London who had known something of the experiences of the Irish. He thought maybe that lawyer might know what to do. That lawyer had no idea what to do. She knew absolutely nothing. She had never heard of rendition. She'd never heard of Bagram, certainly never heard of Guantanamo, and was struggling to understand the concepts by which America could claim it had enemy competence. What were enemy competence? What was this? People being taken from one side of the world to another. But there were some pretty stupid elementary mistakes made by our respective governments, like the accident of allowing Moisem to have a phone. And the first of these was the triumphalist publishing of photographs of men in shackles, bowed down in orange suits, designed to spread a message of humiliation and of domination. But actually it was the reverse. They were shocking. The pictures shocked. They shocked the world. Maybe not Americans so much where prisoners are shackled in prisons do wear orange suits. This was more normality for prisoners in America, but for the rest of the world, that was an error of judgment, and it woke us up to what was going on. And some other pictures too of men in rows, shackled, hooded, being transported across the Atlantic in planes, just like slaves in slave ships centuries before, taken across the Atlantic, shackled. And that shocked too, and that was a mistake. And so when Shafiq Rasul's brother came, it was, in terms of the law, what could one think? Maybe if there was a claim that Guantanamo was America, one could find an American lawyer, could institute habeas corpus proceedings. And by another bit of luck, we had a name. Shafiq's brother had his name. And we found lawyers who were looking for a name in America to bring an action. There had been an attempted class action tried, but without knowing any names, because there was no access to anyone there. And so that began a long, slow process through the courts over years of Rasul v. Bush. And in the end, Rasul won and Bush lost. And the purpose or the importance of that was not lawyers or law. It actually was simply to have humans get into that place to meet the humans who were there. And as Corey has said, bring out information as to what was going on. And when that information began to come out, that was the information that began to generate knowledge, and with knowledge to hold not just the US to account, but our country, because our country was complicit every inch of the way in this, every inch of the way. And so it began to have different kinds of zigzag effects. So an American series of attempts to extradite men from this country fell foul of the law, because it could be argued in the courts here, but if they go to America, they could suddenly be turned into enemy combatants and end up in Guantanamo. So there had to be an assurance given that they would be tried in a federal court according to due process, and if they were acquitted or proceedings ended, they would be returned here. That was the kind of assurance that used to be given in relation to the death penalty on extradition. This country could never contemplate, bound by its international obligations, to put anyone in dangerous way of execution. But the next mistake that was made was to announce triumphantly the first detainees in Guantanamo who would be tried before military commission and would be subject to the potential of execution, and an execution chamber being announced to be being built in Guantanamo. The first persons who were going to be put into this situation would include two British men, Moisem and Faraz Abbasi. And that was to the Americans a gift they could give to their UK allies. But that shocked. And the patriotism of the Daily Mail and newspapers that banged the drum of British nationality, importance, sovereignty, woke up. And these were British citizens who were liable to execution in America. And then then the shift, the balance of resistance to doing anything definitely began to go in favour of get them back. We've got to get them back. And our government saying it's difficult, but we've got to try. And so some came back, then some more, then some more. There were, of course, battles, some legal, and interestingly, when the men got back and litigated, and there began to be disclosure of what had gone on the other side, the government side, one could see some of the psychology at work, including when actions weren't brought. We see the solicitor hasn't brought a legal case on that. We wonder why she hasn't. And you could see the concern about the strength of campaigns as opposed to the strength of what the courts might do in favour of the government. They came back, they litigated. The government did not want a court case, and their actions were settled. That should have been a moment of truth. That should have been that we now in this country have an ethos and a practice that learns all the lessons from Guantanamo. But no, we have Guantanamo here today, and we have circumstances which it would be wrong not to mention. I would not have thought that at this time I would ever be writing on behalf of a mother of her son to the British government to say, we read in the paper there's contemplation of him being sent to Guantanamo. I would not have thought of it as possible. And after months of my letters to that particular minister being ignored, I read in a leaked newspaper article that in fact the government is avoiding Guantanamo as something that misfired in the past, instead is providing evidence by which that young man can be prosecuted in US federal courts, an assurance of the kind they had to make, but this country will not ask that the death penalty not be implemented. So we have in one fell swoop abandoned every moral lesson that we should have learned and more. And we have allowed and perpetuated an ethos in which we will betray our international obligations, and we will have no, and again in that litigation, in that case which is before the courts, they have had to disclose the email traffic between ministers and advice from the Home Office and Foreign Office, which says, if we do this, if we provide evidence that will lead to these people being executed in America, Britain will lose its moral authority in the world. And nevertheless, Sajid Javid has promised it to the US Attorney General. So it is not a message of comfort. Maybe it should contain a message of hope, because if what was achieved in relation to the people who are here in this room tonight and elsewhere, who were never meant to leave Guantanamo, who were never meant to be with us again, maybe the hope is that they're not only here, but they're fighting for others too, and we thank them all for that.